So here in the second lesson of the periodic table unit, we're going to highlight the different types of elements and what makes these different types of elements separate from one another. So we're going to be dealing with metals, nonmetals, and semimetals, and I will give you the characteristics that classifies a metal to be a metal. It's kind of hard to say something's a metal without saying that metals are shiny. Okay, so the word that we use to describe the shine of a metal is called luster. Every metal is shiny. Now, granted, sometimes metals are not shiny when they're rusted, but when every metal is as clean as it can be, it will be a shiny thing. Malleability is another thing that we will be using. Now, the definition of malleability is the ability to be hammered into thin sheets. And all metals can do this. Heat them up a little bit, they become a little bit more malleable, easier to bend or shape. But really, for me, I kind of always just say that malleability means the bendiness of something, and metals have the tendency or the ability to be bendy. That's why we can use them for plumbing. That's why we can use metals for jewelry, because we can easily bend the object to a shape that we want. Another characteristic of metals is ductility, right? So ductility means we can draw something into a wire. We can take a big, chunk of a metal and pull it out slowly to be a wire. And this is very useful for our next characteristic because we use metals in wires, not only because they can be made into wires, right? But because they also conduct electricity. And there would be no point in making metals into wires if they couldn't transfer heat and electrons. So conductivity is another main characteristic of a metal. Typically, and by typically, I mean always, metals are solids. Metals are solids. They don't exist at STP in anything other than a solid. So at normal standard temperature and pressure, a shiny solid, right? A shiny conductive solid would be classified as a metal. The only exception to this would be mercury. Mercury is not a solid at room temperature, at STP. It has a melting point of, let's look this up really quick, mercury, 234 K. Melting point of mercury is 234 K. STP is 273 K. So if any time the melting point is lower than a given temperature, if the melting point has been passed, then that object has melted. And mercury is a liquid. It's a shiny liquid. It's a conductive liquid. So it looks like it's liquid metal. All right, that's one exception you want to look out for. And something that we will explore a lot more in high school chemistry is the ability of metals to lose electrons. So throughout the course of this whole year and this whole course, we're going to be talking about electrons being lost or electrons being gained because it's how everything interacts. Metals have the characteristic nature of losing electrons. Okay? The next category is a nonmetal. Okay? Now a nonmetal is if you understand everything there is to understand about the characteristics of metals, then for nonmetals, you're really just thinking the opposite. Okay? Nonmetals are brittle and they're dull. The word brittle means to break. And dull means not shiny. So those are the opposite of metals. Nonmetals are poor conductors of electricity, the opposite of a metal. Nonmetals exist at all phases of STP. At all phases at STP. They are solids, they can be liquids, they can be gases. And they have low boiling points and low melting points. And if metals lose, they have to lose somewhere. And what they end up doing is they lose their electrons as nonmetals gain them. And that's a topic that we will explore much more as we get going. A semi-metal is a combination of a metal and a nonmetal. So here are two examples that I have written. Example 1, let's just say an element, unnamed, unknown, is described as being malleable and non-conductive, right? So example 1 says, such and such a metal is malleable and non-conductive. Well, malleable is a characteristic of a metal. Non-conductive would be a characteristic of a non-metal. So how can something be kind of a metal and kind of a non-metal? Because it is called a semi-metal. Right? The other example that I have down here says, well, what if an element has luster, meaning it's shiny? And what if that shiny unknown element is also brittle? Well, that gives me a little bit of a metal. It tells me a little bit of a non-metal. So how would we classify something like that? We would call it a metalloid or a semi-metal. The one thing that you just want to make sure you know is both of these words mean the same thing. They can be used interchangeably. So just be sure that you are aware of both of those things. I hope that lesson helped, and take care. Thanks for watching.